Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I would start this week. The first one, the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens coming off bye week after a bad loss versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I think they're going to bounce back, and it's a perfect week to do so, coming off the bye in a bad loss at the Giants. I give up the fourth most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks for this defense, week 11 at Pittsburgh, 18 points allowed, 4 sacks and interception. Week 12 at the Chargers, 23 points allowed, 4 sacks in that ball game. And week 13 versus Philly, 24 points allowed, 2 sacks. So this Giant team, we know they don't have anything going on at quarterback, with Drew Lock most likely starting once again. He's taken a lot of sacks in the last few games he started, turning the football over as well as Drew Lock. I know Malik Neighbors, he's a good wide receiver. Tyrone Tracy's been decent in his rookie year, but besides those two guys, there's not much going on this offense, and it's not a good offensive line as well. So I think Baltimore this week to go out there and have a nice ball game. Now, the next DST I would start is the Minnesota Vikings. This Viking DST been one of the best units all season long, putting up points, getting to the quarterback. And now this week, a great matchup on Monday night. First of two versus the Chicago Bears. Give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So Minnesota, the last few weeks for them, week 11 at Tennessee in that ball game, 13 points allowed, 5 sacks and INT. Week 12 at the Bears, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery, a block kick, winning in overtime. And week 13 versus the Cardinals, 22 points allowed, a sack, 2 INTs. And week 14 versus the Falcons, 21 points allowed, a sack, 2 INTs, a fumble recovery. So like I said, this is a good matchup. Caleb Williams, I know he's not really turning the football over, but he's taking big hits. And this team, they're just not in sync and not getting the football down the field and putting up many points. I know week 12, they had a good ball game offensively, scoring 27 points, but they were trailing early and often and had to throw that remainder of the game to get back in it. And they actually did that, no doubt about it. But I believe this week, Minnesota can buckle down once again and have a good defensive performance. Next start is the Washington Commanders. They're coming off bye. They should be a little bit healthier as the Commanders, and a great matchup at the Saints, where we don't know if it's going to be Spencer Rattler or Hayner in their quarterback. And this Saint team decimated Shaheed. We know he's been out a while, and obviously he's out for the season. And also Chris Olave, I doubt he's going to return as well this season. So now just pretty much Alvin Kamara and Valdez-Scantling, the two main options in that offense. I think Washington could go out there in New Orleans and have a nice game. The last few weeks, week 11 at Philly, 26 points allowed, 2 sacks in that ball game. Week 12 versus Dallas, 34 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, a block kick. And week 13 versus Tennessee, a nice ball game, 19 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. So I think this week they could go out there, have a good ball game as the Commanders. Like I said, New Orleans is decimated offensively, and this Commander defense has definitely played well at times this season. So this week, they're definitely a DST. I would start the next DSTs, the Kansas City Chiefs. So a great matchup with the Browns. They give up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And this Chief team, for the majority of the year, they've been holding teams in the mid-20 range for the most part. A couple games, they've given up 30 points in a ball game. But this week with a good matchup at the Browns, even though we know Jameis Winston is a gunslinger. And a couple weeks ago, he went out there versus one of the best defenses in the league and put up 497 yards and 4 touchdowns, even though he threw 3 picks and 2 pick sixes in that ball game. 12 at Carolina, 27 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 13 versus the Raiders, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. In week 14 versus the Chargers, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks. So like I said, Jameis Winston, we know he's that gunslinger where it's going to be boom or bust, a big touchdown game, or he's going to throw a couple. So I think he's going to play into the hands of this Kansas City Chief team is Jameis Winston, and he's going to turn the football over a few times, and he takes a lot of sacks as well. So this week, Kansas City, after the last couple weeks, they've held opponents down to 17, 2 games in a row, could go out there once again, and I believe could put up a similar performance versus Cleveland in the 5th and final defense DST I have as a start is the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos coming off bye, and 3 games in a row they went out there with some big performances. Before that, week 14 bye, week 11 versus Atlanta, 6 points allowed, 4 sacks and INT. Week 12 at Vegas, 19 points allowed, 5 sacks and INT, a fumble recovery. In week 13 versus the Browns, 32 points allowed, but like I said, 3 sacks, 3 interceptions, including 2 pick sixes. So this week, a slam dunk matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. They don't got much going on in their offense. Anthony Richardson, he's been taking a lot of big hits this season. He's been turning the football over, and his yards per game haven't really been that good as well, even though we know he's a running quarterback. And Jonathan Taylor, it's been a mixed bag of results this season as well. So I think this Denver Bronco team, they could go out there and have a good ball game this week. And like I said, coming off a bye week, get a couple guys healthy and another home game where their defense has been dominant for the most part at home this season. So that's a few defense DST units I would start for week 18 of the fantasy football season.